Here we go again. Hey, everybody, here we are again. This is your two dad, I guess. It's just me this time, and I'm here with my guest. Once again, we are going interview time. We have Mark Phillips from Australia. He is the host of the Mixtape podcast. He's a dad as well. We're going to ask him a few questions today. And if you wanted to just go ahead and give a quick introduction, just whatever you wanted to share about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Mark, as you said. I've been living here in Australia since 2010. Prior to that, I lived in Essex, just east of London in England. Both my children were born in Australia. They're both Aussie kids. Dexter is 10. He'll be 11 in August, and Vivian is 7, and she'll be 8 in October.
Right on. I actually have a little bit later on where we will discuss Dexter a little bit more. He has got quite the story. Just to start out, I had a quick question that maybe you have some sort of idea on, and this is not some. This might be something that you've been asked before. This might be something that you just think is ridiculous. But I've been talking to a few different people from the UK, people from here and there, and it appears to me, just off of this, really brief interaction, that if you're from the UK, if you're from Scotland, England, Wales, that you're more likely to say, yeah, I'm from the UK than you are to say I'm from Scotland or Wales or what have you. Do you find that to be the case? Is that like just the norm?
Yeah, I think when you're talking to someone from overseas, from outside the UK, that is the norm, because it's easier for people. Like if you said to your average, American, that maybe not now because Wales is quite popular in America now because of the Ryan Reynolds TV show. But if you say for someone in America that I'm from Wales or I'm from Scotland, they might not know where you mean. But if you group it as I'm from the UK, everybody knows. Do you know what I mean? That where that is geographically and what goes on there. So I think that's probably the reason why. But yeah, if I'm talking to a fellow Englishman or someone, a Scotsman or a Welshman or whatever, obviously I'll say I'm from England. And they can normally tell from the accent anyway. I haven't picked up any kind of Australian accent since I've been living here. This is my accent that I've had, for my whole life. So I think that's the reason why.
All right, just something that I thought was kind of interesting. I was a little bit curious about. So typically we start off with just some random and very general geographic questions because I try to build my questions off of what I find from just a brief glance at your Facebook profile. And typically you give out
sure.
Where you live. And sometimes that's not been updated. We had one guest that I was asking him a whole bunch of questions about Auckland. He was like, oh, I don't even live there anymore. So if that happens to be the case in this particular instance, I do apologize and we can move on to the next one. But Facebook says that you were originally from Greystoke. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. That's actually it's labeled the second safest major city in Essex. Do you happen to remember any kind of crime growing up? Does that kind of jibe with your experience?
That's quite funny. Second safest in Essex. Wow, that's not really much of an accolade, I'll be honest, because Essex in general is pretty rough. There are some quite nice areas. Greystoke is a very much working class town. There's a lot of industry. The next town across Tilbury is a big major shipping port where boats come up the River Thames and dock there. That's where I did my apprenticeship when I was a young man. And it is very working class. Crime wise, no better or worse than anywhere else I've lived. Maybe slightly worse. Yeah, second safest in Essex. That's bizarre. I didn't even know that sort of league table existed. But yeah, no, it's not. I didn't feel unsafe there, or there was much crime around me at all growing up. No, not at all.
It's interesting that you make note of the fact that it is a working class town because I really do get I was looking at pictures and you really do get the vibe of Pittsburgh or like a city from Russia. Like they did not concern themselves with going outside of the norm or outside of what they needed for architecture and things like that. It's really just, this is what we needed for a hospital and we just built a building there and along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the industry runs alongside the River Thames. So a lot of the industry that's linked to Essex is river based. Like, there's a massive, like, sort of along the river. You could sort of follow the river along Essex, and that's where all the major sort of industry is going up in towards London. But the northern parts of Essex are quite nice and green and pleasant land. There's some quite nice areas, and Rod Stewart lives in Essex. He's got a place just in Essex, and Russell Brand is from Essex, from Grays, precisely. Yeah, he was in my sister's class at school.
Is that a point of pride in the area, like that he is from there, or did you just not?
Very much so.
Right on. There was
Yeah,
another gentleman I talked to. He was from Louth, and there was a few famous people from his area. Not like world famous, but generally famous. And he just wasn't really concerned. Like that didn't, affect him that they were from there or not. So interesting that you
yeah.
guys do take that as a matter of pride. So
I think
moving
I think
on.
with Russell, sorry, with Russell Brand, I think that he gives people something to aspire to. Do you know what I mean? He's very much a self improvement kind of. I won't want to use the word guru, but advisor. Like, that's what he does. He's very much about self improvement, and he's very philosophical about Grays and growing up in Grays and what it was like for him. And in people who live there now understand that that he's one of our people, sort of thing. But he's made it out. Like, he's got away from it, like he's escaped, and he's made something of himself. And there's always, you can aspire to. I'm not saying Grays is like a hopeless town, but people can look at him and see that it is possible. Do you know what I mean? To improve like that and get somewhere, in life, rather than staying in the same town, living in 2 or 3 miles away from where you grew up as a kid. And obviously with me moving overseas and stuff like that, it's a similar sort of way of thinking. I always wanted to get out and get away.
Right on. Yeah, I remember I read his first autobiography and I was pretty much a fan ever since then. So we're going to jump across quite a bit of distance and move on to Perth. I just learned that well, I say you guys, I don't know if you actually consider yourself a full member of the Perth population at this point, but apparently they are referred to as Perthlings. Have you heard that before?
I've never heard that phrase before. No one in Perth uses that expression. No, not at all. No.
Okay, it gave the sense that it was something maybe that you were a bit more open-minded there, that you weren't as conservative in your thinking. I got the feeling that maybe like there was quite a bit of, I don't know. This is just based off of the term itself, but maybe there's like a big UFO community there, things like that. That you guys just
Um,
aren't afraid to look into the things that interest you as opposed to just following the status quo.
I don't think
So
that's exclusive to.
go ahead.
Sorry, I don't think that's exclusive to Perth. I think Australian people in general are pretty sort of liberal and open to ideas like that. Yeah, for sure. I don't think it's a Perth specific thing. I think it's Australia in general.
Oh, cool. All right. I've always wanted to go there, but I mean, I feel like I said this when we spoke to the gentleman from New Zealand, but I feel like if I dug a hole beneath my seat right now, I would show up in your house because you're that far away from me. It's just you're on the opposite side of the world, and I can't see my son really allowing me to take him on that long of a flight until he's much, much older. But hopefully one day. I've always been kind of interested in the idea that it was originally, I mean, it was originally colonized by the British, but for the most part, you have a history of them sending over a bunch of convicts and them, essentially building the country. So that's like
Exactly right.
fascinating to me.
Yeah, there was no room in the prisons in England back in the sort of 1800s. So they were sent on ships to Australia, basically to do exactly that, to build the railways and the buildings and the infrastructure and things like that. Yeah, so that's basically how we came to populate the country. Yeah.
Right on, cool. Just based off pictures, it's like an amazingly beautiful place. I don't know if I haven't looked at a lot of places outside of Sydney just because that's what you typically see with Australia. But
Mm.
if all of Australia looks, well, I know that there's a lot of bush and a lot of desert-y type of environment. But if all the cities look like Perth, then you guys got it going on. It's ranked as one of the world's most livable, quote unquote, cities. And Melbourne actually beat them last year. Is there any sort of competition between Perth and Melbourne?
Huge, huge competition between it's not specifically Perth and Melbourne. It is a little bit, but it's east versus west is really the sort of the rivalry. But Melbourne is the climate there is a little bit more seasonal, so they have more like the four seasons. whereas in Perth it's normally just really hot or not quite so hot. Is basically is how it rolls, but it's actually quite cold at the moment. But yeah, it's Melbourne's got a really good cultural going on, like with gigs and theatre and art, ballet, art galleries, things like that. They've got a lot of that going on, which I think some people in Perth are a little bit jealous of, and that kind of is the basis for that kind of rivalry. But Melbourne's seen as quite a hipster sort of city, and Perth is seen as more of a sort of down to earth sort of place. Yeah, that we don't sort of carry on like that, but yeah, there is a massive rivalry, and it goes between not just between the people, the sporting rivalries. Everything is east versus west. West is best. That's what we say. That's what we say in Perth. But yeah, there is a huge rivalry for sure.
That kind of ties into a question that I had. You guys are one of the most isolated major cities in the world. You're actually closer to Jakarta than you are to Sydney. And the closest thing we have to that in America, I think, might be Las Vegas, where it's just this one city out there away from everything. And it just blows my mind that you have to go so far to really get to anything close to where you live. Does that ever like play on your mind? Do you ever think about that in any way, or is Perth big enough that you just don't need to ever go anywhere else?
During COVID, there was a lot of problems with supplies. Truck drivers, particularly, come a lot of food and sort of stuff that we can't. Perth's not self-sufficient. It doesn't have the manufacturing capability to support itself. So we bring a lot of stuff in from over east and a lot of stuff from Asia as well. And during COVID, it did show a lot that when COVID was very interesting for Western Australia and Perth because we had very, very, very few cases, like handful, hardly any. But we were not allowed to travel outside of our state, and no one was allowed to travel in unless they had, special dispensation. They were truck drivers who were bringing in essential supplies and things like that. But we kept our borders really, really tightly closed, and it did affect us then for that isolation and that distance. There was things you couldn't get in the shops and food and things like that, and it was a difficult time. But day to day, how I experienced the isolation of Perth City, which is something I find always quite annoying when it happens, is because I'm obviously in the music business. I'm a radio show host. I'm a music podcast presenter. Live music coming from somewhere like London, where you can see anyone pretty much any night of the week, anyone who tours, any American bands, any Asian bands, any Australian bands, they tour. They always play in London. They always play in London. But bands come to Australia, very often they'll say Australian tour, and it'll be a big announcement, and they'll go Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and that's it. They don't come to Perth because it's just too far. If there's a big logistical stage set up and things like that for 1 or 2 dates, it's just it might as well be another country. Like you say, we're closer to Jakarta than we are to Sydney. I think Adelaide's our nearest, might be our nearest a major city. But yeah, that's how I experience it. Is the isolation is for that reason. The bands just don't want to come here, or sometimes they do, but it's very few and far between, and it gets quite annoying. I'll be honest with you.
I bet. Yeah, I remember it was similar to that when I was in Hawaii. That you just couldn't get anybody that wanted to go out there. I'm a little bit concerned with the fact that I may have set us for just an hour time limit, and I had some more questions about Perth and just random stuff, but I don't want to take any more time away from talking about you specifically and what you have going on,
Okay.
because that's really what the show is about in these interview segments is the guest, your lives, and whatever you might have to promote. And you're an older man, you've got a lot going on. You've said you've got at least two jobs. But what I really want to talk about first, just in case we kind of run low on time, is tell us about Dexter, because this kid seems like way tougher than me, and I don't know
Yeah,
how him and
yeah.
you have done it.
It's
He's
an
got a lot going
inspiration.
on.
Yeah, he has. And I credit his mum as well. Obviously, we're no longer together. We're not married anymore. But I will always credit his mum with a lot of that as well. But basically, Dexter was born. We'd planned a natural birth. That's what my ex-wife wanted, was a natural birth for Dexter. She was very pro natural birth, and we went to see an obstetrician privately instead of going through the normal sort of public system. So we thought we were getting the best possible care that we possibly could, and we would get the best possible chance of a natural birth. Cut a long story short, our obstetrician went away on holiday, and we had a standing obstetrician. At this point, I should probably mention as well, I was working away from home at this point, a week on, a week off. So I was away in the mine site for a week, and then I was home for a week. And on this occasion, my ex-wife went for a checkup with the standing obstetrician, and he decided that she had high blood pressure. He gave her an internal examination, and then he took her pulse and said, "Well, your pulse is a bit racing." And she was like, "Well, you've just, given me an internal examination. I don't know you from a bar of soap. Like, it's going to happen." And then he basically diagnosed her with onset of preeclampsia, which is a condition that pregnant women can suffer with high blood pressure, and it can be very, very dangerous. So he admitted her to the private hospital on the Friday, and the mine site I was at, you can fly in and out Monday to Friday. There's no flights at the weekend, and I knew she'd gone in to see this obstetrician. I said to her, "If you need me to come home, you need to let me know by like 4 o'clock Friday so that I can get on a flight and come back." And 4:30, she rang me and she said she was in tears and she said, "He's told me he's going to do. This is always the thing that puzzles me. He's going to do an emergency cesarean tomorrow afternoon." So straight away, I thought, well, it's not an emergency if it's tomorrow afternoon. Do you know what I mean? And we never really got to the bottom of what the justification or reason was for the emergency cesarean. We very much feel that she was coerced and railroaded into it when it was not necessary. But at the same time, when a medical professional tells you that you're putting your unborn child's life at risk, you just go along. You just say yes. Do you know what I mean?
That's
Because he's
all they
more
had to say.
qualified than we are. Exactly right. So I remember I did manage to get home. I had to drive about 200 kilometers to the nearest town where I could get a flight from, and I managed to get home about an hour before she went down for the cesarean. Incredibly traumatic time, traumatic birth. Dexter was born by C-section, and he was not breathing when he was born, so he was resuscitated in the delivery suite while we were there. He was then taken to in the humidity crib, which is the little crib that he was 5 weeks premature as well, by the way. And they'd given my wife an injection that would help Dexter with his lungs because they said maybe his lungs might not be fully developed, but if we're giving this injection, he'll be okay, and it will help him with his lung development, and he'll maybe be in the special care nursery for a week or two, and then you can take him home. That'll be what it's going to pan out to. As it turned out, Dexter, and I remember looking at Dexter when he was born. Once they'd resuscitated him, they allowed me to cut the cord while they were sort of stitching up my ex-wife, and they allowed me to cut the cord, and they turned him over, and I remember looking at his bum basically, and not seeing an anal opening. There was nothing there, and he was born without an anal opening. So he was 8 hours old, and he had an operation to give him a colostomy bag, so he would have somewhere to go for the waste to go. 8 hours old, and then fortunately they'd done that operation straight away because that evening I was at. Should also explain as well. We were at the one private hospital where my wife was recovering from a C-section. Dexter was taken about 2 kilometers away to the children's hospital, to the NICU unit there. So I was kind of like jumping between the two, and I was that day or the Friday we got the keys for our new house that we just bought, and we were moving out of our rental at the same time. So I was trying to think about that as well, and then we got a phone call that night to say you should probably come into the NICU unit because Dexter's taken quite a serious turn, and we don't think he's gonna last the night. So we went in, and he was now suffering with something called PPHN, which stands for persistent pulmonary hypertension of the newborn, which is basically when you're in the womb, obviously you're not breathing oxygen, right? You're in the womb, but when you're born, there's a valve in the flap in your heart that opens and allows the blood flow, the oxygenated blood, to flow around your lungs which allows you to breathe. And that didn't happen for Dexter. So he was oxygen deprived for quite a long time. And the cardiologist said to us, he was really amazing. A South African guy, Duplessis, his name was, I'll never forget him. He took us into his office and he showed us a PowerPoint presentation that he'd given to the NICU nurses the previous week about pulmonary hypertension, what it is, how they can treat it, what the options are, what the prognosis is. He was incredible. And he said to us, look, this was, middle of the night, like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I said, I've been with Dexter all day. He said, I have got a relief cardiologist. But basically, he said he's not as experienced as I am. So he said, I'm going to stay and I'll be with Dexter all night and all day tomorrow as well. And I'll make sure, I'll do my absolute best for him. And Dexter was on what they call high frequency ventilator. So it's like a normal ventilator to help you breathe. But it's also pumping nitric acid into his lungs to help his lungs breathe. And so it started off about 80% or something like that. And over the course of like 2 or 3 days, he turned it down, he turned it down, he turned it down until he was almost breathing on his own. But so yeah, so we had both of those things going on at birth. And then we had problems with him being able to breastfeed. So we were in the special care nurse. We didn't hold him until he was about 9 days old. When he was off the ventilator, it was a tough time. It was a tough week or two. I lost my job in that time as well. I was made redundant from my job that week, and we were moving into a new house as well that we'd just bought and spent all our savings on carpets and painting and stuff like that. So it was a really really traumatic time for us as a couple and as a family. Consequently, later my ex-wife was diagnosed with PTSD and general anxiety as a result of that experience. Yeah, so and then Dexter, going forward from that, Dexter then had what they call, when he was 3 months old, they had what they call analplasty. So they created the anal opening, and his bowel and everything was all there. Everything was there, but there was just no exit. So they created the anal opening, connected the bowel to it, and then and then he still had the colostomy bag for another 3 months after that, because once you've done that surgery, you have to give time to let it heal, things like that. So we did that for 3 months, and then he had the colostomy closed up when he was about 6 months old, I think. And then he was in nappies like a normal quote unquote baby, and that was that. He also was born with a collection of birth defects that they qualify under the term Vacteural Association, which is basically the bucket they put in all the birth defects that they can't quantify in any other way. So his genitals were kind of fused together. So his penis was fused to his scrotum. He had an undescended testy as well. So he had to have what did they call it? Like a designer circumcision to cut that piece of skin and make it look like normal, which it does. That was about 8 or 9 months old. I think he had that done. I'm just trying to think of all the different sort of surgeries he's had. So we were seeing cardiologists for regular checkups because of the problems he'd had at birth. And he got to like 2, 3, 4 years old, and he was going all right, but he was having continence problems because of the bowel surgery. Just before he was starting kindy at 4 years old, we managed to get an operation for him called an ACE, which is basically a small incision on his right side there. And what you can do is you can attach a catheter to it. It goes inside his tummy, and you can hang a bag of like a drip bag, but it's just saline solution and literally soap, Castile soap, like natural Castile soap. And you hang that up and you insert that in the hole, and then he sits on the toilet for half an hour, 45 minutes, and that flushes out his entire system. So he's not constantly soiling his underwear and having accidents and things like that. We wanted to get him, we were very conscious of the psychological impact of him being at kindy and being at school and constantly having accidents and soiling his underwear and things like that, and being teased about it and things like that. We really sort of thought long and hard about the psychological, mental side of it for him, and what he was going to be going through. So before he started kindy, we had that operation, and that was a success. That worked really well. And every year he was having a checkup with the cardiologist about his heart. and it was always a routine thing. They'd do the scan and everything, and they'd go, "Okay, yeah, we'll see you next year, not a problem." And then this one year, when he was 4 years old, he went in for his routine scan, and it wasn't that outcome. It was a serious. One side of his heart was enlarged a lot more than the other because the blood flow wasn't quite right in his heart. He had two holes in his heart, which we'd been told would heal up on their own as he grew up and got older, and that wasn't the case. They weren't healing up. So we took him in for that scan, and then, or my ex-wife took him in for that scan, and then 2 weeks later, he was taken in for open heart surgery to repair the two holes in his heart. That was, as a dad, that was one of the toughest moments because I know what the operation entails. Right, I know they're removing his heart from his body and they're going to put it on bypass while they do the repairs, and then, so I know exactly what they're going to do. And I remember we were in the waiting room for him to go in for surgery, and we were trying to really sort of play it down, and so he didn't pick up on our anxiety and our worries and things like that, just to try and ease things on. We took Lego in for him and stuff like that to do to keep him occupied because he can't eat either all day before surgery. So he's a 4-year-old boy. Do you know what I mean? He's just, yeah, it was really difficult for that side of things. And I remember asking him. Only one parent is allowed to go into the, what do you call it, the pre-surgery. I can't remember the name of the room now, but the pre-surgery room where they go in and give you the anaesthetic before they take you into theatre. Only one parent was allowed to go in, and I asked him, "Who does he want to take him, mummy or daddy?" And I remember looking at my ex-wife, and we were both thinking, "Don't let it be me, please. Don't let it be me." And he was looking at me, and he said, "Mummy." And I looked at my ex-wife, and she just went. So I said, "What about if Daddy takes?" And he was like, "Okay, yeah." So I took him, and I remember carrying him down that corridor. I remember it like hyper detail of that. I remember what was on the TV when we were walking past. I remember the smell. I remember the color of the floor tiles. I remember the posters on the wall. Like everything. That moment was just like so deeply ingrained in my mind, and that the amount of surgeries that he had at that point, he was very traumatized by the anesthetic mask that the children have to wear when they go in for surgery. I had to physically restrain him while they put that on him. That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Like those moments, and I look back on that now, and I think anything that challenges me in life, I think if I can do that, if I can get through that, I can handle anything. Not a problem. Do you know what I mean? That was hands down one of the hardest moments of my life. As it turned out, he came out of the surgery well, and yeah, he's been sort of heart wise, he's been fine. He's had annual checkups every year since he was 4. He's 10 now, and about 6 months ago, he had his last checkup, and they said, "We don't need to see you anymore. You're fine." So that was brilliant. That was a really big win. In between that, when he was in, I don't know how your school years go, like grade, don't they? Like grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. So I'll do it by age. So he was 6 years old. So it was year, we call it year 1. I guess you call that grade 1. And his teacher said to my ex-wife one day, "Have you ever had Dexter assessed for autism?" And he'd had a few sort of behavioural problems that we weren't really sort of aware of. We sort of were, but it had been touched upon briefly. We'd skirted around it when he was a lot younger, but I think we both kind of knew that there was something a little bit different about him, but not, we didn't want to acknowledge it because I think there was so much other stuff going on. Like that was, even if it was true, like we just like we haven't got the capacity to deal with that right now. Like that's, we'll look at that another time. And I think we both kind of mentally put it away for a time. And then his school teacher, who has autistic children herself, said to us, "I think you should get Dexter assessed for autism." So he was what, six or nearly 7 years old then. So we did, and they said yes, Dexter's on the spectrum, and by the way, he's also got ADHD. So, brilliant, thanks for that. So yeah, so he's an incredible little boy. I think the way that me and my ex-wife manage him, and I give ourselves a lot of credit for that, because he doesn't see autism or his heart condition, or not, he doesn't have the heart condition anymore, but any of his medical problems, he doesn't see them as obstacles. He sees them as just things that are there. Do you know what I mean? Just things that's how he is. I remember the proudest moment I had as a dad was when we went to see his teacher. We had a meeting with his teacher. I think he was about 8 or 9 years old, and the teacher said, if we were talking about him and academically how he is, and then she started talking about how he is as a boy and a person, and she said, "I've got to tell you this story." She said, "Sorry, I'm going to get a bit emotional when I tell this story, because I always get a bit emotional when I think about this." But she said all the children were sitting on a mat, and she was asking the class like questions, and the children were putting their hands up when they wanted to answer the question. And she asked a question, and Dexter had his hand up to answer the question. She didn't quite get to him, and she asked another question. She moved on to the next question. She said, and the question was, "What do you like about yourself?" And she noticed that Dexter put his hand down straight away, and so she pulled him and she said, "You had your hand up, Dexter. What do you like about yourself?" And he said, "I like that I'm different." And for me, that was just like, you keep that attitude, mate. You keep that thought. You run with that for the rest of your life, because that is the way to go. Embrace the difference. Do you know what I mean? That is absolutely perfect. And I was so proud of him, and his mum was so proud of him. Yeah, it was a really great moment for me as a dad. Like, I was so proud. Yeah, and he just, you look at him and you would never know, Corey. You'd never know like what he's been through, and he's also on top of that, he's had the usual childhood things. He's had his tonsils out. Do you know what I mean? And he's had the usual kid stuff. So I think he's on his 13th surgery he's had now. I think he's got one more to have on his undescended testes still. But yeah, we don't do the bowel washouts anymore. That's finished in the last sort of 6 or maybe 2 months. We finished doing those now, and he's managing to be continent himself, which is a massive win. That's like, doing that washout every other night was a real sort of, we couldn't go camping. Do you know what I mean? Holidays was always extra consideration we have to think about. And so yeah, that was pretty much in a nutshell Dexter's story. Throughout it all, I remember the decision to have another child after that was massive. It was huge, and was something that me and my ex-wife talked about a lot. And we decided that we would. We wanted to try for a brother or sister, and cut another long story short, Vivian was born in 2015, and I think that for me, and I hoped as well, my ex-wife, it was Vivian was a natural home water birth, which to have a natural home water birth after you've had such a traumatic cesarean is it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen someone go through or experience. As far as my ex-wife, it was just the strength of character she showed like during that time was unbelievable. And we're divorced now, and we have our ups and downs and things like that. But that remains like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen anyone do. The moment Vivian was born, it kind of wiped away. Like, everything was written on a whiteboard. Do you know what I mean? That we'd gone through with Dexter, and it's like someone just, that's it, closure. Do you know what I mean? It was amazing. I worried that because Dexter had been through everything he'd been through, when my ex-wife was pregnant with Vivian, I worried that I wouldn't love her as much as I love Dexter, because of what he's been through and everything he's had to overcome. I did worry that I'm not going to. How can I love another child as much as I love Dexter? Like, and then she was born, and it was just like, what was I thinking? Of course, do you know what I mean? She's an amazing little girl, and she's very confident, forthright. Yeah, knows what she wants in life at 7 years old already. And yeah, I try very hard with both me and my ex-wife. Again, we think a lot about the psychological impact, not just on Dexter, but on her as a sibling, in terms of attention, because Dexter, especially when he was younger, used to get loads of attention and hospital appointments and talking about him and conversations. And we were really conscious always of not of Vivian feeling like excluded and lacking in attention because Dexter does get all that attention. So we worked really hard on, and we still do now, even when we're divorced, on one-on-one time with Vivian, especially because we don't ever want her to feel sort of pushed out or start resenting Dexter for his, for that side of things. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Vivian was born without any health concerns or complications at all. And yeah, that's basically Dexter and Vivian's story. Yeah, yeah.
Right on. We're down here to about 11 minutes due to my foolish mistake, I guess. I had so much more to talk about. I wanted to find where you found the strength to go through all this. Like, did you just have awesome parents? I wanted to talk about Tottenham. I like the
No,
idea.
let's talk about Tottenham.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's not talk about Chelsea either.
No,
Like the idea of your
no,
podcast.
I'm happy to go on a bit longer, mate. If you want to go on longer than the hour, that's fine, mate. I can go on a bit longer.
I'm concerned by the fact, like I'm looking at this counter here, counting down from 11 minutes, and I don't want to get to, zero, and we're in the middle of a sentence and it's cut off. I'm
Right,
totally
okay.
fine having you back sometime if you want.
Right.
We could talk a little bit
Yeah,
more
yeah,
about
no
that.
problem, mate.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure that you had enough time to promote your podcast, because obviously, you're doing your thing down there in addition to your numerous other jobs. And I just wanted to, allow you to get that message out to however few fans that we had. Like I said, you had a really cool idea for it, and just share what you want to get out there while we still have the time to do it.
Okay, yeah. So when I separated and from my ex-wife, I went through a kind of process where I was sort of thinking, right, okay, what do I want my life to look like now? What do I want to do? I'm very much anytime I can turn a negative into a positive, and no matter how big or small, I buzz off that. I get off on that like so much. So, and that can be, losing a job and then finding a better job, or separating from my ex-wife and all the heartache and everything that that entails. But then, what can I do that's gonna not make it better, but how can I improve my life? What can I do? How can I make this into a positive? How can I learn from it? What can I take away from it? What lessons can I learn so I don't make the same mistakes in the future? Even if it's just that. I love turning a negative situation into a positive. So I'm a music lover. I love music. I have done all my life. I was that kid in the playground at school, Walkman on 24/7. I had two jobs as a teenager just to buy batteries and cassette tapes. Like that was basically all it was. And so I was running or kind of semi running the vinyl buy and sell business, and I was getting quite well into that. And then one day I was selling at a record fair, and a guy came up and bought loads of CDs off me, and not many people buy CDs anymore. And I was just chatting to him. I said, what are you, a collector or whatever? He said, yeah, I am a collector, but what I want these for is I'm a presenter on a local community radio station, and they let me play whatever I want. So this is what these CDs are for. He said, and I sort of knew him a little bit, and he said, you should come up. He said, you'd be brilliant. Like you should come on. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'll think about it. And then I was in that mindset of just saying yes and being open to new possibilities and new experiences. So I was like, do you know what? I'll give it a go. And so, cut a long story short, again, I went to the radio station. I spoke to him, and we agreed on a late night slot where I'll be playing new music, introducing people to like the show's called the mixtape. So when you make someone a mixtape, you're trying to introduce them to new music, new songs, and that kind of thing. And that's what the radio show is, just on a bigger scale. The second I sat down behind that desk, Corey, and pushed the fader up on that microphone, I thought I'm 50 years old and I've just found what I want to do with my life. This is it. Like how have I not found myself in this situation 25 years ago? Like I was so annoyed. But I was like, okay, well, I'm here now. Let's just make the best of it. So the radio station's good. They let me play whatever I want. It doesn't matter, swear words, content, whatever. As long as it's not too extreme, they're fine. I can play whatever I want. It's 9:30 till 11:30. My show's actually going out right now. It's a pre-record. So it's going out now as we're speaking. That's on a local community radio station. I get a lot of local bands on the show and play them and give them a lot of exposure because it's very difficult for bands that don't have a record deal to get radio play and things like that. So about 45 minutes of my show usually is dedicated to local Perth-based bands and WA bands. And then I was at the pub one day with my mate Al, and he said to me, "You should do a podcast." And I was like, oh, everyone does podcasts. Post-COVID, there's like millions of podcasts out there. What am I bringing to the table? Do you know what I mean? He said, no, you're so passionate. You love music. You know, it'll be brilliant. I'd listen to it. So I was like, okay, all right. So I said, all right, I'll do a podcast. But originally it was, I said to him, I don't want to interview famous people and musicians. I want to interview normal, everyday people, but who've got remarkable stories about what music does for them, what it brings to their lives, you know, experiences. And so I don't want to interview famous people. And then I said, okay, I'll do it. So I started setting it up and getting it all ready, and you know, Spotify for podcasters and all that, setting up the account and everything. And then out of the blue, there's an Irish band I'm not sure if you're aware of called Ash. They were massive in the 90s, and they were doing a 30th anniversary tour, and they were coming to Australia. And I got the opportunity to interview them. And I was like, I've got to put this out as a podcast now, because I had to, because it's Ash. You know what I mean? I couldn't not. And then so I put that out as episode 1, and then I just started interviewing Perth musicians, and I was like, this isn't really what I want to do with my podcast. It wasn't the idea behind it. And then out of the blue, this lovely guy from North Carolina, Jesse, slid into my Instagram DMs, and he said, I've listened to your podcast and your radio show. I think it's awesome. Would you be interested in joining my religion? And I was like, come again? So would you be interested in joining my religion? And what it is, it's basically a Facebook group that where new bands and podcasters and radio journalists sort of network, basically. But it is an officially recognised religion by the state of North Carolina. And I said to him, yes, I'll join your religion. And you were exactly the sort of person I was thinking of when I was thinking about doing this podcast. So will you come on my podcast? And we had a lovely chat. It was an amazing chat. It was brilliant. We're like sort of brothers from another mother, like so much in common with regards to music and stuff. So Jesse was the first guy I had that was really the sort of the essence of what I wanted the podcast to be. Subsequently, I've gone back to interviewing musicians and things like that. But the mixtape podcast, to get to the point, is basically I ask the person who's on the show to pick 6 tracks for their mixtape. So track 1 is your intro track. What's the track that you're going to put on there to draw me in and, you know, make me want to listen to the rest of the mixtape? Track 2 is be obscure, pick an album track or a B-side. Track 3 is what's a song that you wish you could play to your 18-year-old self. Track 4 is, it's my podcast, I'll try and remember now. Track 4 is a song that you would put on there that if you want to let the person know that you're romantically interested. Track 5 is the closing track. What would be your track that you want to have a lasting impact and want the listener to take away and, you know, remember out of all the tracks on the thing? So that's the essence of the mixtape podcast. I'm just starting to record episodes for that now, and so I can consistently release 1 a week. So that starts on the 29th of June. So at the mixtape Perth, which is right there. You can get that on Spotify, on Instagram, sorry, and then all the dates, and you can go back and.
You've gone all choppy on me.
It froze up a bit there. You're back now.
Oh, okay, there you are. Right on. All right. So that brings us down, assuming that this computer's telling me the truth. We have 3 minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead and I guess end it there. I just want to say though that when I read the song descriptions for your mixtape, I was like, I got to do this. Like I should do this for the pod, but I just have so much going on. Hopefully I will add you on Facebook or what have you, add you on the Instagram, and hopefully maybe I could just send you one day, and you can at least you'll have it and you'll have that to remember me by. But
definitely,
that being said, I do appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much. I didn't expect to. I mean, I only use the video for advertising because I just don't go. I don't have long stretches of time where I can go without saying and or thanking for time, and I just don't want to put a video of that out. So it's really just for advertising on TikTok and what have you. I will hashtag you when I do that, so it may be that you will see that pop up. I'm on Instagram too. Your two dads. So it may be that you will see that come across in some way, shape, or form. But I thanks again for coming on. I didn't think that I would spend 15, 20 minutes of it crying my eyes out. But hey, that happens. I was glad to hear your story. And it was, like Thanks. I said, I feel like you have so much more to say. And I really regret I have had interviews before and never had to change the time to reflect anything different. But this time it's made a big deal out of, hey, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. So like I said, I don't want to cut us off in the middle of something.
Anytime you want to do part 2, mate, like just let me know.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. It's really cool how everyone I've talked to, I've been like I could talk to that guy again. And I'm typically like super socially anxious and not very big on talking to strangers. Like that's just not my thing. So this podcast has really been about, at least partly getting me out of my comfort zone and really getting me to meet new people and learn new things. So and you definitely helped a lot with that today. You
Thanks,
are
Corey.
a
Appreciate it, mate.
stronger man than me, Mark Phillips, and I hope that if I can be even close to your level one day, then excuse me, I'll be good to go. Because my son is, he's not experienced half the stuff that nearly the stuff that your son has, and I just worry about him all the time. And to think that you've had to go through what you went through is it's just insane. And I applaud you. You are a man among men. We do a thing sometimes called Dad of the Week. And if we ever get back to our regular episodes, you're going to be my Dad of the Week for whatever week that is.
Thanks, mate.
So
I appreciate
once
it.
again, hey man, thank you so much, and have a good time out there in Perth. Well, I guess it's nighttime today, so for you, but have a good rest of your week, and thank you so much. We'll talk to you hopefully again sometime.
Cheers, Corey. Thanks a lot for having me, mate. I really appreciate it. Good luck, mate.